Mayor Michelle Wu, Boston's first mayor of color, did what no other mayor has done. She formally apologized on behalf of the city of Boston to two black men who were wrongfully accused of murdering a pregnant white woman and her unborn child. The year was 1989.
On behalf of the Boston Police Department, the mayor's office, and the entire city of Boston, I want to say to Mr. Swanson and Mr. Bennett, the entire Bennett family, and Boston's entire black community, I am so sorry for what you endured.
Got that.
For months, as chronicled in the new Boston Globe HBO documentary, city officials, police, and media besieged black neighborhoods in search of a suspect. It was her husband, Charles Stuart, who plotted her killing, but blamed an unidentified black man.
What was done to you was unjust, unfair, racist, and wrong.
Say it again.
And this apology is long overdue.
Way too overdue.
To every black resident, I am sorry not only for the abuse our city enacted, but for the beliefs and the bias that brought them to bear in the first place.
Is this a turning point for the city? I'm Phillip Martin, senior investigative reporter for GBH News here in Boston, and I put that question to two of Boston's leading black voices. Tito Jackson, chair of Boston's Commission on Black Men and Boys, and Yawu Miller, former editor of the Bay State Banner.
I think that, first of all, it's tremendous symbolic value, what she did, and certainly a cathartic moment, perhaps for many black people who were alive during that time, who were stopped by the police and harassed. The symbolism is, represents a turning point. Police practice and and the policies around policing, that's what remains to be seen. I mean, people in the black community since the 1980s have been pushing for the police department to respect their Fourth Amendment rights, their 14th against illegal search and seizure, the 14th Amendment rights again, for equal protection under the law, equal treatment by the law, and those debates are still ongoing. You've seen in the last year the city council push back against the mayor on funding for the gang unit, which when she was on the campaign trail, Mayor Wu said she was in favor of dismantling the gang database, which is a really controversial program within the police department. But in the last few years, she's been pushing against that position and sort of maintaining the status quo. So the bigger question is, how are the police? How might the police change their practices so that what happened during the Stuart case doesn't continue happening?
You think that's resonant? When you said that the way this impacted people who were in the line of fire, if you will, when Charles Stuart situation occurred, of course, Tito, you were right there. You were among those stopped, frisked by the Boston police. So you must have a personal view, but also an analysis about what happens next and what should happen.
Yeah, so I think it is significant what happened yesterday, and it must be noted that it is the first person of color who actually did it, and that there were opportunities for this to be done prior. And so I think it is important also, and as I noted yesterday, the people who are your advisors will tell you not to do this. This is not something internally in a typical space. Folks would actually probably say this is not a safe thing for someone in political office to do. So I think it did take courage. But I think to Yawu's point, what happens next should be, one, as we heard yesterday, an apology is a first step to reconciliation. But I think there is a component in terms of what we look at for reparations and how the city actually handles that component. We have two individuals who, in addition to this time frame, they were targeted. Willie Bennett served 12 years.
A lot of y'all don't know, this stuff didn't stop with my Uncle Willie. I was wrongfully convicted for a murder I didn't commit.
His nephew had served 22 years for a murder case, and he's now out.
Joey Bennett.
Joey Bennett.
That's right.
For murder case that looks like he actually didn't do. And so there's a lot that has happened. And so I do believe that there needs to be reparations, and the families need to be taken care of.
The family has indeed talked about, they talked about the press conference, reparative or response that they're hoping the city will, and I'm sure they're working on it right now, some type of compensation. Now, what about the...
and Al's family too.
Yeah, that's right. And what about the larger issue when we talk about reparations? There seems to, and you're talking about Michelle Wu also taking this step, which indeed can only be described as courageous. I assume there's going to be a backlash. Already you're seeing on social media, as we're seeing, of course, around the country, a backlash against anything that's considered reparative. How do we address the backlash? How does the city, how do members of African American communities, how should they respond to what's inevitable and what seems to be happening already on social media?
Well, for one, you could reframe it from reparations to restitution. There are people who were actually harmed in this, and the city could make amends by compensating them for their suffering. You can make it very specific, but I mean, I think there's no amount of tweaking to the message or to the city's action that's going to assuage the fury of white people in this city who feel like their position of privilege is being diminished now because people of color are in prominent positions in city government, and county government, and state government. I don't think that if the city can take actions to assuage them, and nor do I think they should.
In your view,
Do the right thing. This, as Yawu noted, and I always tell my friends, when you're taking power, and I remember a time when I was in elected office and I was fighting against the Olympics. Standing out, Yawu was there, I was standing outside by myself. I invited everybody to come. And that feeling that you have inside your gut.
taking on the world.
It's absolutely, that was literally taking on. And so when this is happening, you have to push forward towards what is right and also towards what is the future of the city of Boston. And so I posted something on my Facebook the other day, and it said Black men should live to grow old. And the reason why I put that there is about a year ago, the brother Twitch, we have mental health issues and the like. How does this kind of connect? Well, at some point, if we don't have restitution, if we don't actually fix these problems, these things get internalized. It harms people, it harms their children, and it harms our community. So we have an opportunity, I believe, in our time to really push forward and do what is right, and also fight for the future that we have together.
So do you think the Stuart case and the apology is mammoth, perhaps as mammoth in terms of the putting in the imagination as the big lie was in 1989? Do you think the apology can basically overcome the big lie that sort of solidified Boston's reputation in the eyes of many people around the country, particularly Black folk? Do you think the apology can help, if you will, exculpate the city of Boston?
Well, I think that the problem with the focus on the Stuart case, I guess, the extent there's a problem is that that the practices that the police engaged in during the Stuart case were happening long before. And
Stop and frisk.
Stop and frisk. I mean, there were debates in the community, a lot of pushback on the police for stop and frisk, earlier in the 80s. And, to this day, young kids are having their civil rights violated by the police. They're being illegally searched. It's still happening. So
albeit Commissioner Michael Cox's point that this was a turning point for the police and that things have changed, you don't think that represents that big a change? Is that what you're suggesting?
I'm saying that the change. I mean, there's been a change by degree, and the Stuart case was certainly extraordinary in that the reach of the police was a lot greater than it had been But I think most of the young black men and middle-aged black men and old black men who were stopped and illegally searched and humiliated by the police had that happen before, and many of us have had it happen since.
And I think that humiliation might be underestimated.
Man, so and you know, I was telling you guys earlier about my situation when this happened to me. I happened to be talking to a young lady, and stop and search at that time was literally taking your pants down. So, no, is it today? They're still stopping you, right? And Yahu's done some notable work around FIOs, which are the stops that police make primarily in the black community. Right, and we've actually seen as recent as about a year ago, you got white dudes with all the khakis in the city. They must have went and bought all the khakis and they're walking around with shields, right? Police had no idea.
Referencing the Patriot Front.
The Patriot Front, that they were walking around, and at the same time, and I think it was Yawu's work, was like, hey, they stopped all these brothers in the same time frame that you got 50 white dudes walking around with shields throughout the city. So it is notable that also that we have a police commissioner who stepped forward on this.
The police department has changed and evolved in many ways, and we have a ways to go.
The people who should be most angry about a bad police officer are good police officers, right? And so that's the mentality here should be, no, we can't have, if 90% of us are good or 95% of us are good, you're 2%, there needs to be some structures inside that actually make those changes. And that is going to come from the top down. It's also going to come from the contracts and the like, and that stuff remains to be seen.
One of the most remarkable things about this display of Mayor Michelle Wu at the podium was the number of people surrounding her. You chair a commission on boys and men, African-American men who were given a voice at that podium and at that press conference. Talk about the relationship, if you will, between the mayor of Boston, this particular mayor, and what happens going forward. You have she has a lot of detractors, particularly within the police department, and she has some detractors within black communities. What are your views about her relationship with Black Boston?
Well, we've worked long and hard with the Commission on the Status of Black Men and Boys. The fact that it exists. Yawu was there, and you were there also in 2014 when we initially passed it unanimously, and then it was rejected by, at that time, Mayor Martin J. Walsh. It was then moved forward by Kim Janey, who actually signed it into law, and now Michelle Wu is executing it. So we have, as a commission, found the administration to give access. And we've had several conversations about the issues that are facing men and boys. But the real crux of this, to me, is education. Right, one of the highest concentration of black boys are in the Boston Public Schools. So what we do in the Boston Public Schools, writ large, disproportionately affect black men, and so that's a critical component. So funding, access and opportunity, access to exam schools and the like is actually critical. And then the other issue of jobs and economic development, economic opportunity is critical. I will give my friend Shagun Idawu props to know that we went from less than 1% or maybe 2% to now 14% in terms of inclusion. So I think there's some progress, but I also think there has to be more connectivity and relationship building.
And I have to assume, Yawu, that the Mayor Wu realized this wasn't just symbolism standing at that podium. She also understood, of course, that compensation was an issue that's likely to be entertained next. That's the next step for the families involved. But the larger issue of her relationship with black communities, what do you think it portends, the step with Charles Stuart in going forward? Or what might be the ramifications of this in a practical sense?
I think none really. I mean, through an action like this, again, it's, largely symbolic. It's important. The symbolics is important. The symbolism is important, but the policy, like that she's bumping up against city councilors of color around policing issues. The violent crime rate in Boston is half what it was 20 years ago, but we still have the same police force we had 20 years ago, the same numbers. And Black and Latinx city councilors were calling for, taking police funding away from the police and, redirecting it to the kinds of interventions that actually prevent crime, because police can show up at the scene of a shooting and determine culpability, sometimes with, accuracy, sometimes without, but they can't prevent it from happening. Boston used to have a street workers program. We don't have that right now. It's, it kind of was dismantled or fell apart. And again, the funding for the police, the fact that we're continually hiring more officers, they're doing more overtime without really an explanation of why the overtime is necessary, without an accurate explanation, without being able to answer questions to the council about why why the overtime numbers are going up, what's the need, without an honest conversation around that. So the fundamental ways in which policing is done, there's still an undercurrent of people's rights being violated. Just a couple of years ago, my son, when he was 12, was illegally searched by police. It's still happening. The relationship hasn't fundamentally changed.
But how is that possible, given, again, the magnitude of the apology in juxtaposition to the big lie and Mayor Michelle Wu's larger goal, it seems, of creating basically bringing communities together, eviscerating a lot of the distrust that has built up over the years, but yet you're saying there's a status quo.
Well, and as noted, I had a young man 6-7 months ago who was parked in front of my driveway, which he shouldn't have been. But I came out and the police were searching him, and I stood there and I said, "Hey guys, what are you guys doing?" And I know him, and they said, "Well, we're doing an investigation." I said, "I'm going to stand right here while you do your investigation." And they randomly, four guys who were white guys, jumped out of a SUV, and they were searching right in our community, and didn't find anything. The guy had his laundry in the back of his car. And so, to your point, Yawu, I think the proof is in the pudding. And for me, when I'm coming from government, there's a song, "Ain't Nothing Going On But the Rent." Back in the day, this is about line items and it's about policy. And so where do the funds come from? And as noted, we had a bloated overtime budget. And if you talk to police officers, by the way, many of them don't want forced overtime, which is another critical aspect of what's going on, and those reallocation of funds. And as also noted, from a crime perspective, we don't have the street worker program, which is a proactive intervention program that are not sworn folks. So we have a lot of work to do. In addition, in the context of housing, and the fact that people are now getting pushed out of the city, and then also when you look at the numbers of Black people in the city of Boston, the percentage of the city of Boston that was at 25, correct me if I'm wrong, is now down to 20, and that has a lot to do with housing. So those overarching dynamics are not affected by what just happened, right? So this is a good and important step around justice, but it has to be have a higher level relative to public safety, housing, education, and all of the other things that are important parts of government.
Okay, Yawu, last word.
Right. I fully agree with what Tito said, that the material reality for Black people in the city of Boston in some ways has gotten more dire, particularly with regard to the displacement of people from the communities in which they historically lived. And I think that the mayor's taken some meaningful steps around many of those issues. But as Tito said, the proof will be in the pudding. Like, we'll see how it plays out.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Here we have the apology, hopefully hoping to overshadow the big lie, but a lot of practical considerations that simply haven't been addressed in your view. All right, thank you very much. Will the mayor's apology make a difference? Tell us what you think in the comments below.